Kyrsten Sinema, Dave Chappelle, and Katie Couric on RBG. I'm Cecily Fernandez, and this is A Square Circle. Hello and welcome to The Square Circle. I'm your host, Cecily Fernandez. Joining us today are libertarian and senior fellow at the Cato Institute, Doug Bandow. Doug, did I get it right?
Nice. You got it right. Nice to see you.
I got it right. Okay. We're off to a good start. Nice to see you. Conservative Jennifer Kabbany, editor of the College Fix. Jennifer, welcome from the West Coast.
Thank you.
And progressive political reporter James Rosen. James, so nice to see you.
Good to be here.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone. This week, Senator Kyrsten Sinema, a pivotal figure in the congressional budget saga, escaped to Europe on a fundraising trip. This after getting harassed repeatedly by progressive activists over the past few weeks. But her absence means the federal budget remains in limbo. Doug, tell me, do you think this high-profile harassing of Senator Sinema is helping Democrats move their budget forward?
That kind of activity rarely works. It's very unlikely to make her more likely to vote for, the programs they want, and it's very likely to turn off some moderates out there who are, somewhat less progressive within the Democratic Party. That's what activists do. They do it on the right, they do it on the left. They try to push people around, but I think it tends to go over very badly with most people.
And Jennifer, what do you think of the Democrats' budget impasse?
Well, with regard to Kyrsten, I just have to say, last time I checked, fleeing the state or country to avoid a vote was heralded as brave and courageous. I mean, I recall just a few months ago in July when the Democrat state lawmakers fled Texas to avoid the bill on to improve our voting safety. Everybody just thought they were, so brave and so courageous. So I don't see what the big deal about Kyrsten is right now, going off to Europe. But the impasse is needed because this bill is a train wreck. It is just adding such an incredible amount of debt to our nation's, which already at trillions and trillions of dollars. I just don't think we can afford it, and it really needs to be hacked.
Okay, and James, what do you think?
Well, I think there's still divisions within the Democratic Party, and until the Democrats can work out those divisions, I don't think that divisions within a party are automatically bad. We see the Republican Party marching in lockstep behind Trump. So I don't think that divisions are necessarily bad, but on a bill this large, as the others have said, the party putting it forward can't, behind the president, can't be divided in the way that Democrats are divided. So they have to solve their own differences first.
So James, before you finished with the last thing you were saying that, this is too big. This is too big of an issue, basically too important to Democrats for them not to come together. That's what you seem to be suggesting.
Right, and the problem is that their margin went down in the House in the last election. I mean, one of the ironies of the last election is that yes, President Trump lost the presidential election, but the Republicans narrowed the gap in the House, and the Democrats, although they gained nominal control of the Senate, as Senator Manchin of West Virginia has shown, he doesn't agree with large parts of their agenda. So at best, it's 50-50. So they don't have a lot of room for margin. And also, President Biden has not been, let's just say I knew Lyndon Johnson. He's no Lyndon Johnson, okay? In terms of twisting arms and even Bill Clinton was able to persuade. This is somewhat similar to the first major budget bill that passed when President Clinton was president. Al Gore famously cast the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, and some Democrats took took a tough stance that cost them their seat. But President Clinton was extremely involved in twisting arms. He was very, he was making calls. He was meeting personally with members of Congress. I'm not sure President Biden is doing that.
Okay. And Jennifer, do you think that part of the problem is that the Democrats' budget is simply not popular enough among Americans in general?
Well, I think the reason Manchin isn't supporting it is because it's absolutely too large, right? Even he's saying, hey guys, we got to trim this a little bit. I mean, they're throwing everything in the kitchen sink in this thing. I mean, at some point we have to have a little austerity. I mean, we have to, as a country, decide what we can fund and maybe just what we can't afford. And I think that's an idea that even wise Democrats can get behind before the 2022 midterm elections.
Doug, do you want to weigh in on the budget?
Yeah, I think this shows the problem of a political party that has basically nominal control of the legislature. I mean, both the Senate and the House, the problem for the Democrats is people perceive they are in control. But of course, as a practical matter, it's extraordinarily thin. I mean, the House is the amazing one, 3 or 4 votes. I mean, for a body that big, so they can lose in both the House and the Senate. And then, the constituencies, the activists want something and they think we're in control. Why don't we get it? And public out there says, well, why isn't anything happening? They perceive the Democrats control everything when in fact they don't. So this is a real political challenge for the Democrats. And I mean, it's not just Manchin, it's Sinema, but also, New Hampshire senator. I mean, there's a number of, members of the Senate and the House. I mean, a number of the House members who won very narrowly. They saw some of their colleagues go down. They're also very nervous about the size here. So this is a real challenge. I think almost all these programs individually are popular. It's when you put them all together and people start saying, wait a minute, we passed like, $3 trillion earlier last year. And there's the infrastructure bill. And oh my goodness, now this is what, 3.5, I think that is the challenge. And you start, this is, you have to pay for this. I mean, neither Republicans nor Democrats like to do that. But at some point, we're already well over 100% of GDP is debt. We're approaching the record that was set in the 45, 46 coming out of World War II. At some point, we got to get a handle on this.
Okay. Well, also this week, comedian Dave Chappelle stirred up controversy with his remarks on gender. Here's NBC's coverage.
Tonight, comedian Dave Chappelle once again at the center of a swirling controversy.
Oh, buddy, I'm in trouble now.
The polarizing stand-up drawing swift backlash for jokes in his latest special, The Closer.
Gender is a fact. This is a fact. Every human being in this room, every human being on Earth had to pass through the legs of a woman to be on Earth.
Critics characterizing the remarks as transphobic and slamming Netflix for airing them.
TERF is an acronym. Stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. This is a real thing. This is a group of women that hate transgender. They don't hate transgender women, but they look at trans women the way we blacks might look at blackface. I'm Team TERF. I agree, man. Gender is a fact.
Jennifer, let's start with you. Do you think Dave Chappelle is cancel proof?
Yes, I do. And thankfully, I'm just so glad that there's a pushback on cancel culture where we can say what we want in America because this is America and the First Amendment defends free speech. But there's a market for this. People are hungry for truth. People are hungry for edgy comedy again, like make edgy comedy great again, right? So, he is cancel proof because he refuses to be canceled. And who led the way for that is Trump. Trump taught people that it's okay to say what you want and then not cower and beg for forgiveness after you upset a few people because you're not going to please everybody.
Doug, what do you make of the controversy of Chappelle's Netflix special?
Well, obviously, he's coming up against wokedom. I mean, he's saying things that people find very unpleasant. And I have to say, from my standpoint, my temperament, he is pretty raunchy. I mean, and certainly what he says, you can understand why some people in the trans community would find offensive. On the other hand, I think it's important that people be able to speak out. We've always had a level of humor in comics that take on almost everything. And to some degree, I think that's important to have people raise issues. It's very dangerous when there's a set line out there which you can't transgress. I mean, Martina Navratilova, who was one of my favorite tennis players, is gay. And she criticized the idea of trans, basically males who, kind of who now identifying as female playing sports with, biological women. And she got, reamed and attacked. Well, this is somebody who came out very early. She was very courageous. I mean, she came, defected from the Czechoslovakia, made her way in the West, and now, kind of in a sport at that point that was still very much seen as heterosexual, was willing to say she was gay, and she's being attacked on that. It strikes me we have to be able to talk about these issues and debate them. We can't just put, kind of slap people down if they want to raise issues that we might not be happy with.
And James, do you think activists are doing more harm than good when they go after popular comedians like Dave Chappelle?
I don't like the term cancel culture. That's a whole long discussion, because I think it wraps in legitimate concerns with illegitimate concerns. It's a very broad spectrum. But, I think the comedians are kind of a special category onto themselves. You can go back to Lenny Bruce, who said things that really outraged everybody. You can go back to George Carlson, is that his name? The 7 words that got him banned. Yeah. Is it Carlson? George? Huh?
Carlin? Is it George Carlin?
George Carlin. Thank you. Was saying words that got him banned from the networks. More recently, Sacha Baron Cohen with Borat, who I think one of the greatest movies made in my lifetime, really offended everybody. So I think comedians get more leeway. I'm a big supporter of the rights of, for lack of a better word, gay people and transsexual people to live freely. But he's good in our culture today. He's going to get pushback, but he's a comedian, and comedians. One of the reasons why they're popular and get big audiences is because they say really outrageous things that very few other people say.
Right. And he's protected by making a whole lot of money for Netflix. So that's
right.
That's part of it too. Jennifer, tell me a little bit more about what you see happening in these kinds of examples of activists going after high profile actors and comedians. Do you think that ultimately this is going to backfire?
Well, there is definitely no end in sight. I mean, anytime an actor steps out of line, the protests, the petitions, the boycotts. So there's a lot of pressure to toe the line, especially in Hollywood. It's a very far left, circle there. And to be right of center in that town is practically impossible. But, I think you're seeing more and more pushback where actors are trying to say, I want to say what I want to say. A perfect example is Rob Schneider. I don't know. He's another comedian. And he's on Twitter and he's kind of blowing up his profile with all sorts of controversial comments about COVID and free speech and this and that. And I think you're getting more of that because people just want the freedom to say what's on their mind and not to be attacked and vilified by keyboard warriors every time they turn around.
And Doug, do you think that we're going to start to see diminishing returns? I mean, after a while, I think when, activists go after people, high profile people for these kinds of things, it's going to you're going to start to see less and less of a response until, finally people are just going to be, kind of tired of it. So what you could have is it maybe even a situation where people who should be canceled won't be because people are just, tired of the whole thing. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the interesting question is there a point where people who now essentially run for cover when they get attacked? I think especially, progressives, kind of genuine academic liberals, say at universities, if they start standing up and saying, wait, I'm not going to put up with this, that academic freedom, et cetera. So I think there's a tendency of folks who try to just stay out of it. You see this stuff happening, the shrapnel's, flying, bullets are going around, and you just duck. And if there's a point where people start saying, wait, this is just ridiculous. I mean, you're ruining people's careers for, this or that if there's a kind of a response from folks who otherwise now just try to stay out of it, clearly somebody like, a comedian who has a very strong fan base is in a much stronger position. Making money for Netflix clearly helps. that they are much less likely to cancel him because they have a real investment in him. And there are a lot of people out there who I mean, I think that, James is right, that, comedians especially have this opportunity. And I think, will that spread? I think, because there are a lot of folks now, I think the inclination simply is, I just drop it, I try to get out of it, I say I'm sorry, whatever. And I think we may see that people just get tired of it. They've heard so much of it, and the feeling it shuts down debate, that it doesn't allow us to talk about stuff.
James, what do you think about that? Do you think that, I know you don't like the term cancel culture, but there certainly is an attempt by a lot of activists to go after people personally, to try and get them fired because of their politics. Do you think that this is a trend that's going to be ending, or is it going to be continuing?
Oh, it's going to be continuing. It's not, people on the right try to cancel viewpoints that they don't like. People on the left try to cancel viewpoints that they don't like. The terminology actually changes every few years. Now everybody talks about cancel culture. For a few years back, it was PC. You couldn't, it was the PC police. Now nobody talks about the PC police. Instead, it's cancel culture. A few years from now, it'll be a different phrase. But of course, a lot of this is magnified by social media, and the fact that, somebody can make one remark on social media, goes viral, and gets blown up. We haven't talked about John Gruden. I don't know if any other folks are NFL fans here, but he was coach of, was it the Las Vegas Raiders?
Yeah.
Las Vegas Raiders, formerly the Oakland Raiders, long owned by an extremely controversial dude named Al Davis, who said all kinds of outrageous things back in the day. And Gruden resigned immediately because some emails surfaced in which he made comments about gays, comments about women, and he forwarded photographs of very scantily clad women. Well, I mean, this may get me in trouble, but if every guy gets fired for, forwarding photographs of scantily clad women to his buddies, there'll be more guys not working than working. So
I think I'll let that be the last word. Finally, TV journalist Katie Couric admitted in her new book to some selective editing of remarks by the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Here's the story from the Hill.
Former Today Show host Katie Couric has admitted to cutting quotes out of an interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg that she did back in 2016, where the SCOTUS judge said that kneeling during the national anthem shows a, quote, contempt for a government that has made it possible for their parents and grandparents to live a decent life. Social media users were outraged that Couric chose to withhold this from the public to protect Ginsburg on the Supreme Court, but she openly shared the moral dilemma in her new book.
James, do you think it was unethical to edit out Justice Ginsburg's critical comments about kneeling for the national anthem?
Well, I mean, this is a tricky one because interviews get cut for length all the time. And the technology is so good that it's seamless now. I mean, I keep dating myself, but back in the day, you could kind of tell when an interview, a TV interview, had been edited, and we really know what got cut, what's left on the cutting room floor. I think that if she was critical of people who were
Kneeling.
To kneel, was that it? Who were refusing?
She was critical of the players that were kneeling.
Like, Colin Kaepernick.
Colin Kaepernick, yeah, she was critical of that. I mean, I'm a big admirer of RBG, and I definitely would have wanted to know that she criticized that movement. I think so. So I think that was a mistake. I think that was a mistaken choice in terms of what was cut. But the idea of cutting interviews for length, that's just normal. That happens all the time.
Although, but that is kind of the, it's one thing to cut extraneous stuff.
Yeah.
But that clearly she was cutting the lead. out of the story, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no doubt about it that if Ruth Bader Ginsburg was criticizing Colin Kaepernick and the players who followed in his wake, definitely newsworthy, definitely should not have been done. And Katie Couric's an outstanding journalist, so kind of surprised.
Jennifer, what do you think of that? Were you surprised to learn that Katie Couric had done some selective editing with her interview with Justice Ginsburg?
No, because the mainstream media, the legacy media, this is what they do. They protect Democrats. They protect them by either what Katie did, which was not including that quote that might have gotten RBG in trouble, or, choosing stories to ignore, or, selecting stories and telling them in a way that paints people in a bad light. They like to do this. This is just one example of many.
And Doug, do you think that this is kind of reflects this, the way the media will, just avoid things that don't, are not in line with kind of a more liberal narrative?
Well, Katie Couric was very explicit. She says she did it to protect RBG. I mean, I think that James is right that you can have editing and you don't know, I mean, it's going to be shorter. You don't know why it's shorter, but in her case, she made it very clear. She did this for a political reason. She wanted to protect RBG from criticism. This is a political motive on her part. And I think that is destructive of journalism. I mean, we all know, nobody's truly objective in the sense that we all have opinions, we all have views. But historically, journalists have tried to put those aside and to report a story. And you often get very good stories from people who might be an ideological ally, but they do a very good journalism case. What worries me here is this, I think, is reflective of a broader trend where there are mainstream media journalists who view this as part of the cause. And I think to some degree we saw a lot of that with Trump. Now, I am not a Trump fan, but I do think, I remember even in the 2016 campaign, watching some of the networks thinking, this is supposed to be objective. There are like 11 people, attacking Trump, and one person occasionally says something okay about it, and that's viewed as objectivity. Don't pretend. I mean, to my mind, I have no problem with, I write opinion journalism. I have no problem with that, but be honest about what you're doing. I think Katie Couric puts out a veneer of objectivity. And then with this, she's telling us actually no, that, when she's doing her journalism, she has something else in mind. It's a political objective.
Jennifer, do you see, I see, what Doug is saying is, that Katie had said that was protecting RBG. I think it's more that she was protecting the audience from what RBG really believes. Where do you see that?
Yeah, it can be both. I think, she was doing both because they want to create a certain narrative and they don't want to get certain people in trouble. This was a bit of paternalism on Katie's part. She's older, maybe she didn't realize what she was saying, but she was running defense for Ruth, which Ruth didn't need. I mean, she's a Spitfire, right? Like, she is a tough lady. She can handle it. She meant what she said, and America deserved to hear it.
And James, I'll give you the last word on this. Do you think, in a way that's pretty, it's insulting also to say, that the Supreme Court justice needed Katie Couric's help in protecting her from her views. What do you make of that?
Well, I'd have to know a few more details of, the interview obviously happened before she died. She was in failing health before she died. I'd have to know what the time frame, how much time passed between the time the interview was done and when it aired. I also wonder, and I'm not making an excuse for Katie Couric, but she's too good of a journalist to have just done this carte blanche. I also wonder if Justice Ginsburg maybe had second thoughts. I mean, this has happened to me with my sources a number of times in my career. Maybe had second thoughts, called Katie back later and said, I'm really feeling, I don't feel good about what I told you about that whole kneeling thing. Can we talk about that? So I'd have to know more details. Let me just say quickly, I had there were many times when I would interview a senator say. And he would say things. And of course, the aides are listening in, they're sitting there and so forth. And then I would get a call from a nervous aide saying, hey, can we revisit X, Y, and Z? And, you know, you're talking about a US senator. It's a tricky call. A lot of times I said, look, we were on the record, he's a big boy or she's a big girl, tough luck. But there were times when, you know, they gave me enough of a fair explanation that, you know, I did let them modify what they said. It's tricky.
Yeah. Great. Well, we do have some questions from our viewers. Melanie Jordan asks, almost everyone agrees that harassing Senator Sinema in the bathroom was wrong, but what about on an airplane or at a restaurant? How much personal space are politicians entitled to? Doug, what do you think about that? How much space should we give our politicians?
Well, I think a lot depends on how you do it. I mean, that is, you know, to come up and just say, Senator, I just want to respectfully, you know, give my opinion on this, and then leave, and then go and kind of leave them alone. To some degree, I think if you're a public, you know, figure, you know, that's part of it. It's, you're an elected official, you know, and it's important to be open and have access to the public. You know, there's a certain point it becomes abusive. There's a certain point if it's clearly private time, you're out with your family. So I think the problem here, to my mind, is if it's happening a lot. I mean, that tells me that it's over the top. And there, I think it's going to be negative. That, you know, Sinema is not going to react badly to one person coming up to her, even in the bathroom. But if it suddenly becomes kind of a thing, where, you know, it seems to be almost a concerted campaign, I think it's going to backfire.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, what do you think? I mean, you know, do you think anybody is going to want to go into politics when you start seeing more and more of this and following people into bathrooms and being aggressive like this? How much space do we need to give politicians?
You know, I couldn't help but think when you were asking that question of poor Rand Paul, because remember the guy was just mowing his lawn and then his neighbor came and like injured him seriously. And then him and his wife last year were walking through DC and they were completely mobbed, dangerously so. I really think that as Doug mentioned, there's a time and a place for criticism, and they are certainly all politicians of both aisles need to be able to take a, you know, constituent kind of coming up to them and politely and professionally saying, hey, look, you know, you're wrong on this issue. I want to let you know. But when it's private time, when it's family time, when it's warranted. The bathroom is not a place to criticize. Okay. Like, let the lady use the restroom in peace, please.
Okay, James, what do you think? Is the bathroom off limits? Can we agree on that?
Yeah, I think the bathroom's off limits. I mean, I think that, you know, I'm originally from Michigan, and Governor Whitmer, a bunch of people were arrested for a plot to assassinate her, kidnap her, and assassinate her. There's a feeling, you know, across the political spectrum that politicians are, it's open season for politicians. And I think this sort of, you know, harassing them when they're eating dinner with their families, I think it just feeds that. I don't think it's right. On the other hand, politicians have made themselves generally much less available to the public. They use press releases and Twitter and aides than politicians used to. So there's some frustration. But yeah, I think this is a bad trend that should be, you know, kind of nipped in the bud.
Well, it's time now for the most underreported story of the week. So Doug, would you like to go first with your most underreported story?
Well, I'd say serious international issues that could get us into a war. You know, Afghanistan was very ugly, but the human cost in terms of Americans was relatively small. But things are heating up between Taiwan and China, and the US is potentially in the middle of that. If war happens there, we're talking real war, big war, ugly war, something Americans have not had to worry about, certainly since Vietnam and potentially before that. And kind of along the way, not quite as bad, but it's the situation of Iran. The negotiations over getting back into the JCPOA are not going well. And the question is, what happens there? What does the US do? What does Israel do? Both of these, I think, are heating up in very serious ways. They're a lot more important than Afghanistan.
So Jennifer, for you, can you tell us what was your most underreported story of the week?
Well, this has been reported, but I feel like it needs to sound many more alarm bells. And that is this proposal to give the government, the IRS, access to our bank accounts. I mean, if this isn't scaring the daylights out of you, I don't know what will, but they want to hire 80,000 new auditors. I mean, I think both Democrats and Republicans can agree. What a nightmare. And, we should really start to make more of a fuss about this proposal because it is very intrusive and it's going to cause nightmares for years to come if we allow this one to slip by.
And James, for you, what was the most underreported story of the week?
Well, I'm Jewish. I grew up in a almost entirely Jewish suburb of Detroit called Oak Park. There were many Holocaust survivors. The parents of my friends had survived the Holocaust. So this is a particularly sensitive and upsetting story to me. In a county called Carroll County in Texas, a senior administrator of the school board in that county told school teachers to provide balanced views when they were teaching about the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And her exact quote was, make sure that if you have a book on the Holocaust, that you have one that has an opposing perspective. And I don't know what an opposing perspective about the Holocaust would be, other than the fact that it didn't happen, or it wasn't so bad, or the Jews deserved it, or I don't know what an opposing view would be. She was criticized roundly. She's the school district's executive director of curriculum and instruction, so she has a very high position, and I think she deserves the criticism she's getting royally.
Well, thank you for all those underreported stories. It's inspiring, makes you want to go out and look that up and learn a little bit more about all of those things. But that's all the time we have for this show. Thanks to our guests, and thank you for watching or listening to The Square Circle. I'm Cecily Fernandez. We'll see you next week.